My dad's past came back to haunt us, and our whole family got dragged into it. We thought we were safe until the final twist changed everything. I didn't expect a random text from my cousin to turn my entire family upside down, especially not after all these years. It all started with an invitation to a family reunion that I wasn't even sure I wanted to attend. But one text, a few awkward questions, and a lot of old family history later, I found out things about my own relatives that made me look at them, and myself, in a completely new way. I'm Sarah, and my family isn't exactly what you'd call close-knit. Sure, we get together for the big holidays, Christmas, Thanksgiving, the occasional wedding or baby shower, but aside from that, we mostly keep to ourselves. I have 2 siblings, but we're all pretty spread out, living in different states. So when I received a text from my cousin Kate, whom I hadn't seen in 5 years, inviting me to a reunion at my aunt's house, I hesitated. Family reunion, Saturday at Aunt Marge's? The text read. I know it's been a while, but I really think you should come. I found something out that might be important. That last line made me pause. Something important? What could that even mean? We weren't the type of family that dealt with important secrets or any kind of drama. Sure, we had our differences, but nothing that warranted a dramatic revelation. Still, something about Kate's message felt sincere. It was odd for her to reach out like this, especially when she lived a few hours away, and we hadn't been in touch much. After sitting on it for a day, I decided to go. Maybe it would be good to reconnect with everyone, and if there was really something important to talk about, I figured I could always leave early. When I arrived at Aunt Marge's house, I was greeted with the usual warm hugs and small talk, but there was an underlying tension in the air that I couldn't quite place. Kate wasn't there yet, but Aunt Marge and my older brother, Ben, were talking quietly in the corner of the living room, looking a little uneasy. When Kate finally arrived, she pulled me aside. I'm glad you came, she said with an almost apologetic look in her eyes. There's something I need to tell you about Grandma. My stomach churned. Grandma? What's wrong with Grandma? No, nothing like that, she said quickly. It's just, there's something about her past that I didn't know about until recently. Something I think you should know. I sat down on the couch, trying to keep my cool. Okay, I'm listening. Kate hesitated for a moment, then pulled out an old, yellowed letter from her bag. I found this in the attic when I was helping Aunt Marge clean up some stuff. It's from Grandma's younger years, when she was living in the city before she met Grandpa. I took the letter from Kate's hands, carefully unfolding it. It was written in elegant, handwritten cursive, and it seemed like it was from a time long before I was born. It was addressed to Grandma, but there was no return address, and the contents were mostly about someone named Edward. I think Grandma was in love with this Edward guy, Kate continued, as I read the letter. The letter talks about them making plans to run away together, but then she met Grandpa, and things changed. I had no idea Grandma had ever been so serious with someone else. I stared at the letter, completely caught off guard. I'd always known Grandma as this kind, gentle woman who had been married to Grandpa for decades, but this was a whole different side to her I'd never imagined. So what happened to this Edward? I asked. Kate shrugged. I have no idea. I tried asking Aunt Marge, but she didn't know much either. Apparently, Grandma never spoke about him again after she married Grandpa. But I think this letter explains why she never told us about him. It might have been a part of her life she wanted to leave behind. After hearing Kate's story, I felt like I had a glimpse into a whole new version of my grandmother. It was like peeling back a layer of her life that had been kept hidden for so long. I started wondering about all the things our family never talked about, the stories that were forgotten or pushed aside as people moved on with their lives. As the reunion went on, I found myself thinking about Grandma's past and how much we all had to learn about each other. After dinner, I found a quiet moment to speak with Aunt Marge. I didn't know about Edward, I said gently. Do you think Grandma ever regretted not going after him? Aunt Marge looked thoughtful. You know, I think she had her reasons for moving on. Life changes us in unexpected ways, but I think she made peace with it. At least, that's what I choose to believe. She always wanted what was best for us, even if that meant keeping her past to herself. That evening, we all sat around the table, talking and laughing the usual family jokes, filling the room. But for me, it felt different. I'd learned something new about Grandma, about how complicated, messy, and beautiful life can be, even for people who seem so certain about who they are. Before I left, Kate gave me a hug. "I'm glad you came, Sarah. I think you really needed to hear that. We all have our stories, you know?" I smiled, feeling a warm sense of connection that had been missing for years. "Thanks for sharing it with me. I never thought Grandma had a secret life." "None of us do," Kate said, laughing softly. "But that's what makes family so interesting, right?" As I was leaving Aunt Marge's house, I overheard a conversation between my mom and Aunt Marge in the kitchen. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but what I heard made me freeze in place. "It's time to tell them about their father," Aunt Marge was saying, her voice low. "What do you mean?" Mom asked. "I mean the truth. It's time." I felt my heart race. What truth? What were they talking about? I wanted to ask, but I couldn't bring myself to interrupt. When I got home, I thought about what I'd overheard all night. Could there be another secret in our family? One that involved my own dad this time? As I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story, something I wasn't ready to uncover just yet. But deep down, I knew I would eventually have to. I thought I had it all figured out. The family reunion had given me a glimpse into Grandma's past that I'd never imagined, and everything felt perfectly normal again. But then came the conversation I overheard between my mom and Aunt Marge that night. They were talking about my dad. The way they spoke, it wasn't just about old memories or family history. There was something raw, something urgent in their voices, something about the truth that was still being kept from me. I needed answers, and this time, I wasn't going to let anyone hide them from me. The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about that conversation. What did Aunt Marge mean when she said it was time to tell about their father? I could barely focus at work. I kept replaying the words in my mind, wondering what truth they were hiding about Dad. I decided to confront Mom. She wasn't exactly the open up and talk about feelings type, but she wouldn't lie to me, not outright at least. That evening, when I walked into the kitchen, I found her making dinner, humming to herself. It looked so peaceful, so normal. But the tension in my chest was overwhelming. I couldn't just pretend everything was fine. "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can we talk?" She paused, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" "I overheard something the other night. You and Aunt Marge about Dad." Her face changed instantly, like she had been expecting it. She sighed, sitting down at the kitchen table. "I thought you were going to ask about it sooner." I sat across from her. "What do you mean? What did Aunt Marge mean by the truth about their father?" Mom's face tightened, and for a moment she looked years older. "Sarah, I think it's time you knew some things. Things about your father that we've kept quiet about for a long time." I felt a lump form in my throat. "What do you mean? Why didn't you ever tell us?" Mom took a deep breath. "It wasn't because we didn't trust you, but because it wasn't the right time. And truthfully, I wasn't sure how to explain it. But I think you're ready now. It's about the years before he met me." I leaned in, my curiosity piqued. "What happened? What aren't you telling me?" Mom hesitated, staring at her hands. "Your dad didn't come from the ideal background. I mean, you know that, but there are things about his past that would have changed the way you saw him growing up." I was confused. "What are you talking about? You mean before you two got married, right? Was he involved with someone else? I thought you and Dad met in college?" Mom shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Not exactly. Your father had a history before he came to college, a history he chose to leave behind, and I respected that. But I don't think he ever fully moved on from it." I could feel my heart racing now. "What are you saying, Mom?" Mom sighed. "He wasn't always the man you think he is. Before we met, your father was in trouble. A lot of trouble. He got involved in things that were hard to get out of." "What kind of trouble?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "His family had debts. His father was involved in things. Illegal things." "And your dad?" Mom stopped herself. She looked like she was struggling to find the right words. "He was in with the wrong crowd," she finally said. "He did some things to survive, things he's never talked about with anyone. When I met him, he was trying to escape it all. But I think he was always running from it, never really leaving it behind." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. What kind of things? What did he do? Mom avoided my eyes. I don't want to get into the details, but I think he thought that if he put enough distance between that life and you two, you'd never know. And you didn't. But Sarah, there's a part of him that's still stuck in that world. I felt the room spin. Was my dad, my calm, steady, hardworking dad, really someone who could have a dark side? Someone who hid a past like that from me and Ben all these years? What do you mean, Mom? How can you just leave it at that? I asked, my voice shaky. What else is there? Mom stood up abruptly, the air between us thick with silence. You need to talk to him, Sarah. It's time. It's been long enough. He owes you an explanation, and he knows it. The weight of her words sank in. My mind raced. I had so many questions, and I didn't know where to start. But one thing was clear. I needed to talk to Dad. I couldn't just leave this hanging over me. The next day, I waited until he got home from work. As soon as he walked through the door, I could tell something was off. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept all night. But the moment he saw me sitting there, his face hardened, his guard going up. Hey, Sarah, everything okay? I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. I need to talk to you about something Mom told me. He froze, clearly not expecting this. What did she tell you? I overheard a conversation between you two. I said, about your past. You owe me the truth, Dad. What happened before you met Mom? What are you hiding? Dad's face went pale. He sank into the chair across from me. I was hoping you wouldn't find out this way. I need to know, Dad, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Why didn't you ever tell me? Why didn't you ever tell me the truth? Dad exhaled slowly, his eyes searching mine like he was deciding whether or not to tell me everything. It's not easy to admit, Sarah. I wasn't the person you think I am. He paused. I made mistakes, big ones, and I wanted to protect you and Ben from that, from who I used to be. Who were you, Dad? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He took a deep breath, his eyes flickering with memories. I was a part of something much bigger than I ever intended, and I don't know if I can ever truly make up for it. But I'll try. I promise I will. Before I could ask him more, the doorbell rang. We both froze. Who's that? I asked, confused. Dad stood up quickly, his expression tense. It's someone I didn't expect to show up right now. The doorbell rang again, more urgently this time. Dad walked toward the door, his steps heavy. I followed him, my stomach in knots. When he opened the door, a man stood there, a stranger to me. The man looked at Dad and said one sentence that sent a chill down my spine. I think it's time you told your daughter the truth about everything. Mike, about the deal you made. The man at the door wasn't someone I recognized, but there was something about him that made me feel uneasy. He didn't just look like a stranger. He looked like someone who knew my father too well. His presence was unsettling, like a storm that was just about to break. When he said, "It's time you told your daughter the truth about everything, Mike," my heart skipped a beat. I knew that whatever my dad was hiding, it was bigger than anything I could have imagined. I needed to know everything. Now. The man's name was John, and he was surprisingly calm for someone who had just shown up uninvited at our house. Dad, on the other hand, was visibly shaken, his usual calm demeanor shattered. "John, this isn't the time," Dad said, his voice low but firm, his hand on the door as if to block him from entering. "I think it is," John replied, his tone sharp but controlled. "You can't keep running from your past, Mike. Not anymore." I stood frozen in the hallway, torn between confusion and a growing sense of dread. Dad glanced at me, his eyes pleading for me to understand. "Sarah," he began, his voice softer now. This is someone from my past. I didn't want you to be involved in this." "Who is he?" I asked, my voice trembling. John stepped forward, pushing past Dad and into the living room. "I'm someone who's been waiting for Mike to come clean with his family. He made a deal, Sarah. A deal that affects all of us." "Dad, what is he talking about?" I demanded, my heart pounding in my chest. Dad looked at me for a long moment, his eyes filled with regret. "Sarah, I should have told you this a long time ago. I should have told you and Ben, but I thought I could protect you from it. I was wrong." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had spent my whole life thinking my dad was the most dependable person I knew, the one who always showed up for us no matter what. But now I was standing in front of a man who seemed to be unraveling everything I thought I knew about him. "What deal, Dad?" I asked again, feeling a mix of frustration and fear. Dad sank into the couch, his face drained of color. It started years ago, before I even met your mom. I was working for a company that specialized in all sorts of shady business practices. They were involved in things like property deals that weren't exactly legal. Money laundering, fraud, you name it. I wasn't proud of it, but it was a job. I was young, and I didn't know any better. John nodded in agreement. Mike didn't start out as a criminal, but he got caught up in something much bigger than he expected. A series of bad choices led him to make a deal with the company, a deal that would tie him to them forever. What kind of deal? I asked, my voice shaking. Dad swallowed hard, unable to meet my eyes. I agreed to help them clean up their finances in exchange for them clearing my record and keeping me out of jail. It was a dirty deal, and it was the only way I could save myself. But I thought I could get away from it. I thought I could leave that life behind. But they didn't let me go that easily. I could feel the weight of his words pressing down on me. It was like a bomb had just exploded in the middle of our family, and I had no idea how to process it. My father, the man who had always been the moral backbone of our family, had made a deal with criminals, and that deal was still haunting him. And now, us. How did this affect us? I asked quietly. Dad hesitated. It affected everything, Sarah. The money we had when I first met your mom, some of it came from them. They paid me to stay quiet, to keep my mouth shut about what I knew. But over the years, it became harder to keep up the act. I wasn't just running from the company anymore. I was running from myself. John's face was impassive as he spoke. Mike's been hiding from this for years, Sarah. But the truth is, they've always known where he is. And now, they want something from him. They want him to come back into the fold. And if he doesn't, well, it won't just be his life that's at risk. What? I gasped. What do you mean? What are they going to do to us? John looked at me, his gaze cold. They don't care about who you are. They'll use anything they can to get Mike to cooperate. If he doesn't help them with their latest scheme, they'll expose everything. His past, the things he's been hiding, the truth about the money. And it won't just ruin his life. It will ruin your family's future too. I felt like the floor had dropped out from beneath me. My dad, the man I thought was untouchable, had a dark side, one that was now threatening to unravel everything. All these years, I'd looked up to him, trusted him, and now it felt like I didn't even know who he was anymore. What do we do now? I asked, my voice small. Dad finally looked up, his eyes filled with pain. I'm sorry, Sarah. I should have told you sooner. I should have been honest with you about who I really am. But I thought if I kept everything in the past, it would stay there. I was wrong. John's expression softened, but only for a moment. You can't hide from this forever, Mike. They're already watching you. We need to figure out how to handle this before they come after you. Or worse, your family. I turned to look at my father, my heart heavy with disappointment. Why didn't you tell us this before? Why didn't you trust us enough to be honest? Dad ran a hand through his hair, exhausted. I was ashamed, Sarah. I thought you'd look at me differently. I didn't want you or Ben to know that the man who raised you wasn't perfect. I wanted to protect you from this. Protect us? I repeated bitterly. By keeping secrets from us? By letting us live in the dark? I paused for a moment, taking it all in. I realized that no matter how much I loved my dad, I couldn't pretend everything was fine anymore. I needed to know the full truth. We can't keep running, Dad, not from the past, not from them. You have to face it. We have to face it together. Dad nodded slowly as though he knew what was coming next. I've been waiting for you to say that, Sarah. I was hoping you would. You're right. We can't hide anymore. Just as we were starting to gather ourselves, the doorbell rang again. My heart skipped a beat. I looked at Dad, but his face had already hardened, the weight of the past pulling him back into his shell. He stood up and walked toward the door, a mixture of dread and resolve in his every step. I followed him, and as he opened the door, I saw a woman standing there, a woman I had never seen before. She was in her late 30s, dressed in a sharp business suit. Her eyes were calculating, her smile tight and forced. Mike? She said coolly. We need to talk. I'm here on behalf of the company. Dad's shoulders slumped. I thought you'd send someone. The woman stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. It's time to pay the price for your silence, Mike. And this time, we're taking more than just your conscience. The door slammed behind her. The moment the woman walked into our home, I knew we were in deeper than I ever expected. There was no mistaking her presence. She wasn't here just to talk. Her cold demeanor and the way she sized up the room made it clear that whatever deal my father had made was about to resurface in ways none of us were ready for. "Mike," she said again, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "You owe the company, and we're here to collect." I felt the air in the room thicken as Dad's face tightened, his eyes flicking from me to the woman, back to the door like he was weighing his options. But there were no options left. We were trapped in the web he'd been tangled in for so long. I couldn't stay quiet any longer. "Who are you?" I demanded, standing up straighter despite the fear clawing at me. "What's going on here?" The woman turned her gaze toward me, sizing me up with a cold precision. "I'm Karen," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "and I'm here to make sure Mike holds up his end of the bargain." Dad's shoulders sagged. "Sarah, I should have told you this sooner," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "But this is bigger than anything I can explain in a few words. It's been haunting me for years. I never wanted you to find out like this." "I don't care about how we found out, Dad," I shot back, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and betrayal. "I care about why you kept it from us. Why didn't you trust us enough to tell us the truth?" Karen folded her arms, watching the exchange with an almost detached interest. "It doesn't matter how we got here. What matters now is what Mike's going to do next." I turned to her, my frustration boiling over. "And what do you expect him to do? Huh? You've already blackmailed him into silence all these years. What more could you possibly want from him?" Karen's lips curled into a slight, mocking smile. "We're not here to discuss your feelings, young lady. We're here to collect. Mike signed an agreement years ago, and now that agreement is about to expire." Dad let out a low curse. "This isn't how I wanted it to go. I thought they'd leave me alone if I just kept my head down." "Clearly, they didn't," I said bitterly. "So, what exactly are you collecting then? What does this company want with us?" Karen's eyes flickered with a hint of amusement. "It's not about you, sweetie. It's about Mike. You see, that deal he made, it didn't just involve money. It involved something much more valuable, his loyalty. And now, they need him to do something he's been avoiding for years." I glanced at Dad, who was barely holding it together. His face was pale, his lips tight as though he was trying to suppress a panic attack. But there was no hiding it now. The past had caught up with him, and it was too late to shield us from it. "What is it you want him to do?" I asked, my voice shaking. Karen stepped closer to me, her gaze unwavering. "That's the part Mike needs to explain. But let me put it this way. He's been playing the part of a good, upstanding family man for years. But at the end of the day, the company owns him. And it's time for him to pay them back." "What do you mean, the company owns him?" I asked, a horrible thought creeping into my mind. "Are you saying you've been controlling him all these years?" Karen gave a small, almost pitying laugh. "In a way, yes. But it's more complicated than that. Mike's been living under a false identity for all this time. The life you knew, the life you grew up in, it's built on a lie. Everything from your house to your school tuition to your family vacations, all of it was made possible by a deal Mike made, a deal that came with certain conditions. And now those conditions are about to be met." I couldn't breathe. It felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me, and I was falling into a pit of confusion and fear. "What do you want him to do, Karen? Just tell me already." She paused, her smile tight, but her eyes never leaving Dad. "It's simple. Mike needs to return to his former life. The company wants him back. They need him for something big, something that could make them even more powerful. And if he refuses, they'll destroy everything he's built, the life he's built with your mom, with you too." She looked at me with cold, calculating eyes, "Including your future." Dad finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "They want me to go back to doing what I used to do. The illegal stuff, the things I promised I would never touch again. I can't go back to that life, Sarah. I can't." But Karen wasn't having any of it. "You don't have a choice, Mike. The company doesn't care about your morals or your promises. They care about results. And if you refuse, they'll expose everything. They'll destroy you, your family, your reputation. They'll tell your wife. They'll tell your children. All of it." Dad's face twisted in anguish. He looked at me, his eyes pleading, almost desperate. I never wanted you to know this, Sarah, but I can't keep running from it anymore. I have to make a choice, and I don't know what that choice will be yet. I stood there in shock. The man I had always known as my dad, the one who had worked hard to provide for us, to give us everything we needed, wasn't who I thought he was. His past was darker, more complicated than I could have ever imagined, and now that past was threatening to destroy everything we had. Dad, you can't do this, I said softly, my voice barely a whisper. You can't go back to that life. It's not worth it. Karen stepped forward, pushing past Dad to get closer to me. You think this is about what he wants? It's not. It's about what the company demands. And Mike here, he's a man of his word. He'll do what he's been asked, or else. Just then, the doorbell rang again. My heart jumped in my chest. It was almost too much. Was it more bad news? More people from my dad's past coming to tear our lives apart? Dad froze. He looked over at me, his expression a mix of horror and dread. Stay inside, he whispered urgently. Don't open the door. But it was too late. The door had already opened, and there, standing in the doorway, was none other than my mom, and she didn't look like the woman who had just spent the past 20 years raising a family with Dad. She looked different. Her eyes were hard, cold, and her words hit us like a bomb. You need to listen to me, Mike, she said, her voice unwavering. I've been waiting for this day, and it's time we all face the truth. Dad took a step back, his face going pale as he tried to process what was happening. What are you talking about, Maria? Mom didn't flinch. I knew about the deal, Mike. I've known all along. My heart pounded in my chest as my mom stepped into the room, her presence filling the space with an unexpected gravity. Dad, who had been so tightly wounded in the presence of Karen, seemed to deflate when he saw her. For a moment, time seemed to slow down as I watched the two of them face each other, the weight of years of secrets between them. And then she spoke the words that, in that moment, made everything shift. I knew, Mom said softly, her gaze locked onto Dad. I knew about the deal, and I knew that one day it would come back to haunt us. I felt my stomach churn. What was going on here? My mom, who had been the picture of support and unwavering love, knew all along. Dad didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, his face pale, his fists clenched by his sides. He was in shock, I could tell, but slowly he exhaled as if some invisible weight had just lifted. He turned toward me, his voice barely above a whisper. I wanted to protect you, Sarah. From the moment I made that deal, I knew I'd made a mistake. But I thought if I kept everything hidden, I could keep you safe. I thought if I ran far enough, if I built this life, I could leave it all behind. But I was wrong. Mom reached out and gently placed her hand on his shoulder. We both were, Mike, she said, her voice calm but firm. We thought we could outrun the past, but it's always been right there, waiting for us. I felt a wave of emotions crash over me. Betrayal, confusion, sadness, but also a flicker of understanding. My dad wasn't a villain. He wasn't some criminal mastermind. He was just a man who made a desperate decision years ago to save himself, and now it was tearing him apart. But so much of this had been kept from us, hidden in the shadows. You knew this whole time? I asked my mom, my voice trembling. Why didn't you tell us? Mom sighed, her face softened with a mixture of regret and determination. Because at the time, I believed in Mike. I believed that if we kept quiet, if we just lived a quiet, normal life, it would all disappear. I didn't want to tear apart the life we built, not for something that was in the past. But I should have trusted you. We should have trusted you both. I was still reeling from the revelation. My entire life had been built on a lie that, even now, was threatening to unravel before our eyes. I had so many questions, so many things I didn't understand. But Karen was still standing there, unblinking, watching us with the same cold expression. I didn't come here to make you feel guilty, she said sharply, breaking the silence. I came here because the company doesn't care about your family's feelings. They only care about power. Mike's involvement is not optional anymore. He needs to act, and he needs to act fast, or all of this, your family, your house, your future, will be gone. I could feel the tension rise again, the pressure building. But this time it was different. This time, we weren't facing it alone. Mom was here. We were all here together. Dad turned to Karen, his voice firm now, like the man I remembered from my childhood. I've made my choice. I'm done running. Whatever happens now, we face it together. Karen's eyes narrowed, but there was a flicker of something, maybe respect, before she turned to leave. The offer stands, Mike. But know this, there's no turning back. You'll be back under their control. Do you want that? Dad shook his head. I've already been under their control for far too long. With that, Karen gave a small nod, like she was dismissing us, and walked out the door. The room was silent for a long time. The weight of what had just happened hung heavily in the air. But then, Dad finally spoke. I've been living in fear, Sarah, he admitted, his voice cracking. I was scared that if I told you everything, you'd leave, that you'd think I was a monster. But you've always been the heart of this family. Your mom and I, we made a mistake, but we're going to fix it. No more lies. No more hiding. I looked at my mom, who nodded in agreement. For the first time in a long time, I felt like we were on the same side. And then I realized something. This family, this unit, wasn't defined by my dad's past. It was defined by how we moved forward from it. Together. We're not perfect, Mom said softly, her voice steady now. But we can start fresh. We can fix what's broken, and we will. It was like a dam had broken inside me. The anger I had felt, the hurt, it all started to dissipate, replaced by a sense of hope. My dad had made a mistake. He'd been carrying this heavy burden for years, and now together we could help him lift it. I'm proud of you, Dad, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I know this wasn't easy, but you're doing the right thing. Dad smiled weakly, but there was relief in his eyes. I don't know what's next, but I do know this. I'm not going to let fear control me anymore. Just as the weight of the moment seemed to settle, the phone rang. We all exchanged nervous glances. Dad stood up, hesitated for a moment, and then answered it. Mike speaking, he said, his voice steady. There was a long pause, and I could see the color drain from his face as the person on the other end spoke. Mike, the voice on the phone said coldly, you've made your decision, I see. But know this, you're not done. We know where you are, and if you think you've gotten away from us, think again. Dad's expression hardened, but he didn't respond. Instead, he hung up the phone with a steady hand and turned to us. They're not going to let this go, are they? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Dad met my eyes, and for the first time in years, I saw something different in him. Something fierce, determined. No, they're not. But we're not running anymore. We're facing it head on, no matter what comes next. As we all sat there, trying to process what came next, the doorbell rang once more. This time, none of us hesitated. Dad stood up, walking to the door with a quiet resolve. But when he opened it, no one was there. Instead, on the doorstep, there was a small, unmarked envelope, carefully placed on the ground. Dad picked it up slowly, his brow furrowing. "What's this?" he muttered. He opened it, his hands trembling slightly. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one line of text. "You can't outrun the past, Mike, but we can make you wish you never tried." And with that, we knew. This fight wasn't over. It had just begun. The air was thick with tension as Dad held the letter in his trembling hands. Mom stood beside him, her jaw set in determination, while my brother and I exchanged uneasy glances. This was it, the culmination of years of secrets, lies, and fear. The note wasn't just a warning, it was a threat. And for the first time, I realized that no matter what choice we made, there was no escaping this fight. Dad finally spoke, his voice calm but steady. "They want me to believe I'm powerless, that I'll always be at their mercy." He looked up, meeting each of our eyes. "But they're wrong. I'm done letting them control my life." For the next few hours, our family sat together at the dining table, hashing out everything. Dad's past, the company's threats, and what we could do to protect ourselves. "I was young, reckless," Dad began, his voice heavy with regret. "I thought I could outsmart them. They gave me money when I was desperate, but the price was my freedom. When I realized what they wanted me to do, I ran. I thought they'd forget about me if I stayed under the radar, but I underestimated their reach." "And now they want you back," I said, trying to process the enormity of it all. "But why now, after all this time?" Mom chimed in, her voice calm and logical. "They're desperate. Something big is happening, and they need people they can control. People who know how to play the game." "They picked the wrong guy," Dad said firmly. "I'm not going back. Not now. Not ever." "That's all well and good," my brother said, his voice edged with fear. "But how do we stop them? They've got power, resources, and they know where we live. Dad leaned forward, his expression resolute. We fight back, but not the way they expect. The next morning, Dad made a series of phone calls. He reached out to a former colleague from his past, someone he trusted, someone who also had a reason to resent the company. It turned out that Dad wasn't the only one who had been burned by their ruthless tactics. Over the years, others had broken free too. Together, they'd started a small network of people willing to help those who wanted out. The man on the other end of the call, a gruff voice named Elliot, didn't mince words. "You've got a fight on your hands, Mike, but you're not alone. We've been waiting for someone to stand up to them. And if you're serious, we'll help." Over the next week, our family worked together to gather evidence. Bank statements, emails, old records that Dad had kept hidden but never destroyed. Every piece painted a picture of the company's illegal activities, the shady deals, the threats they used to keep people silent. At the same time, Elliot's network helped us set up safeguards. They installed security cameras around our house, encrypted our devices, and even helped Dad draft a statement to the press, a contingency plan in case things got worse. It wasn't just about protecting ourselves anymore. It was about exposing the truth. The breakthrough came one evening when my brother, who had been combing through old files, stumbled upon something big, a document Dad had signed decades ago. It wasn't just a standard agreement. It was proof that the company had knowingly coerced him into illegal activity. Worse, it included a list of other names, employees who had been manipulated just like him. "This is it," my brother said, his eyes wide. "This is the smoking gun." Dad stared at the paper, his hands gripping the edges tightly. "If we release this," he said, "they'll come after us harder than ever. But if we don't, they'll just keep hurting people." Mom put her hand on his shoulder. "We've come this far, Mike. We can't stop now." Together, we compiled everything we had into a single damning dossier. Elliot connected us with a trusted journalist, someone who had been investigating corporate corruption for years. It was risky, but we agreed to meet her in person. The night before the meeting, Karen showed up at our doorstep. This time, she wasn't alone. Two men in suits flanked her, their presence radiating quiet menace. "You're making a mistake," Karen said, her voice cold. "You think you can take them down? You can't. They're too big, too powerful. If you go through with this, you'll lose everything." Dad didn't flinch. "Maybe, but at least I'll lose it on my own terms." Karen studied him for a long moment before shaking her head. "You always were stubborn, Mike. Let's see if that gets you anywhere." Then she turned and walked away, leaving the threat hanging in the air. The next day, we met the journalist in a crowded coffee shop where we handed over the dossier. She flipped through the pages, her expression shifting from curiosity to astonishment. This is huge," she said. "If this checks out, it could bring the whole operation down." "Good," Dad said. "It's about time." Within days, the story broke. Headlines screamed about the company's corruption, the lives they'd destroyed, and the people they'd manipulated. The public outcry was immediate and overwhelming. Investigations were launched, arrests were made, and the company's power began to crumble. For the first time in years, Dad seemed lighter, freer. He had faced his past, and in doing so, he had reclaimed his future, and ours. Months later, life began to settle into something resembling normalcy. Dad started a new job, one that didn't involve looking over his shoulder. Mom went back to her art, finding solace in painting. My brother and I moved forward, knowing our family had come out stronger on the other side. But one evening, as we sat together for dinner, the doorbell rang. Dad frowned, but went to answer it. When he returned, he was holding a small envelope, identical to the one Karen had left before. Inside was a single piece of paper with a chilling message. "Congratulations on your victory, but don't think this is the end." Dad sighed, shaking his head. "Let them come," he said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "This time, we're ready." And for the first time, I believed him.